Oh, fire. Yeah, it can be very hot, can't it? But from what we saw in the most recent chapter of My Hero Academia, fire is not always hot. In fact, fire can be cold. And in this video, we're actually going to go over the science of how that is actually possible and how Shoto's flash, fire, fist, phosphorus actually could work in real life. And we'll get more into that right after this. Hey guys, how's it going? It is your boy, Manga Man Drew, and I'm here to talk about the most recent chapter of My Hero Academia manga, chapter 352. But to be more specific, I actually want to talk about specifically Shoto's new ultimate moves, what it really means, how it actually works, and just talk more about it because it's very cool, both literally and very much figuratively. So, let's start off before diving more into the actual discussion about how Shoto's Flash, Fire, Fist, Phosphorus works. Let's talk about some things that were different between the official and unofficial translations. And there wasn't really that much difference between the official and unofficial translations. Only really one difference comes more at the beginning of this chapter when it comes to how Shoto is reminiscing about when he was talking to his father and how he will be the one fighting Toya and not his father alongside him. And how in the unofficial translation, it brings up as the reasoning why Shoto is doing this is a way of punishing his father, and that Hawks and Best Jeanist wanted to not have Endeavor fighting Toya as a form of punishment. But in the official translation, it's a little bit more different than that. And that the reasoning why Shoto is actually fighting Dabi, not only because it's his own choice, but because he doesn't want his father to actually do it, because if his father does it, then it would be like his father being punished, and that Hawks and Best Jeanist made the right choice to not put him there. So the idea in the official translations is that Shoto needs to put it upon himself so that his father doesn't go through more trials and tribulations than he necessarily needs to on his own. So it's really showing that Shoto does, in a sense, care for his father and doesn't want him to go through this trial on his own or even with him alongside him, because it would just be very taxing on Endeavor himself, and that it would be more punishment for Endeavor than he really needs to go through. So it just shows that Shoto is still a very caring and understanding individual. And yeah, that's pretty much everything that was different between the official and unofficial translations for this chapter. So now let's dive into more of the discussion on how Shoto's new ability works and what it could entail in the real world. For starters, let's talk about what his technique is in name and what that naming could mean. Because last chapter we learned about Shoto's new technique, the Flash, Fire, Fist, Phosphorus. Or Phosphor. I may be confusing it a little bit more, but let's talk about the Phosphor part of his super move. Because we already know the Flash Fire Fist comes from Endeavor and his Flash Fire Fist. But Phosphor comes from something a little bit more different. Phosphor actually comes from the element on the periodic table of phosphorus, which is the atomic number of 15 and the atomic letter of P. And how when it comes to phosphorus, it has actually been named in another name as a cold fire by Henning Brand, and how it was discovered in around 1669, nice. And how the reasoning why it got the name of a cold fire is due to the properties of how phosphorus is able to ignite in its two main forms. You have white phosphorus and you have red phosphorus. White phosphorus is the phosphorus that is very highly reactive and that it can combust or become this shining light glow at cold or even room temperature. And that it is very reactive to oxygen, which you know is something that is around us all the time, which is why white phosphorus more often than not has to be stored underwater. And that it normally appears as this yellowy white wax that once again can be easily ignited by oxygen without fire being a part of it, without the addition of heat or a catalyst of heat. And that it can ignite at 30 degrees Celsius or around 86 degrees Fahrenheit. which is probably the reasoning why it's called cold fire, because it doesn't need an ignition source to do it, and that it can just do it out in the open. While on the other hand, red phosphorus is sort of kind of the opposite and is actually sort of a middle ground between white phosphorus and violet phosphorus, and how it's derived from white phosphorus through a chemical reaction of the white phosphorus being heated up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit or 121 degrees Celsius. And the red phosphorus can ignite at 30 degrees Celsius or 522 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reasoning why this is important is because white phosphorus, red phosphorus, Shoto, white hair, red hair, fire and ice. It makes so much sense that he would name his Flash Fire Fist Phosphorus, not only for what it's able to do, which we're going to talk about later, but just the symbolism of what phosphor or what phosphorus is, and the red and white really relating to who Shoto is. And it's amazing that Horikoshi was able to make this connection. And this connection makes even more sense when we get more into how his Flash Fire Fist Phosphor actually works in relation to a cold or cool flame or fire. Because in the chapter, we got an explanation for how this technique actually works. And for the most part, how it works is as so. How this sort of kind of cold fire is created by using both sides of Shoto's body at the same time and having it be at his heart, which would be the center. And how it is being done through the circulation of both heated and cooled blood through both sides of his body. Which explains why the heart is the center, because that's where all of the blood in your entire body gets pumped into and from. And that's kind of how his cold fire or his cool flames works in the manga. Now, that's not how it works in the real world, but it's actually very similar to how we can actually make cold flames or cool fire in the real world. Because what a cool flame is, or what a cold fire is that it's a chemical reaction that does not release heat, light, or CO2, and it is not a vigorous reaction. Which is very important, because what fire and flames are, and specifically in respects to fire, is the rapid oxidation of a material and the release of heat, light, and other materials or other compounds. So in the sense, a cold flame is still a fire, but the main difference is it doesn't release heat at a high enough temperature for us to feel it. And that this process of creating a cold flame is dependent on a fine degree of the balance of the temperature and the concentration of the reaction mix. Very similarly to how Flash Fire Fist Phosphor is able to be created, how Shoto is able to have an equal mix of his blood to be in balance or equilibrium throughout his entire body. So that shows that there is a similarity between how Shoto uses his Flash Fire Fist Phosphor and how cold flames are used in our real world. And how when it comes to a cold flame, the reasoning why it's cold is because the gases that produce or are coming off of the flame itself, which the flame itself is just the visible representation of the gas, is cold. And that even though the electrons, which will have the higher temperatures of the 1,000 degrees, will not be hot enough nor be able to release enough energy to be detected over the cold or the temperature of the actual gas. So pretty much what cold flame is just the releasing of the flames or the releasing of a gas that is at a cold temperature. And that the actual fire itself is still a fire, but the energy that is being released by the electrons is so minimal that we cannot really perceive it as being hot. And what makes it even better is that cold flames, depending on how cold the gas is, can actually have a freezing aspect to it. Very similarly to how Shoto is able to use his fire to pretty much freeze the entire environment at the end of this chapter and throughout the chapter itself. Pretty much, cold gas equals a cold flame. In that even though Shoto isn't using a gas to actually make the fire cold, in reality, he would be. And most likely, what he will be using to make the fire cold would be helium. Because helium has the ability to keep the electrons free while being able to have the gas itself be done at a cold temperature. And if you make the helium cold enough, you can make the fire actually able to freeze. There's a video all about it that I watched that pretty much gave me all the information that I'm giving to you right now, and you actually get to see it actually occur by having something being frozen in that video. So I would advise you to go and watch that video for a little bit more detail than what I am giving you now. But yeah, pretty much what we're getting in this chapter is that Shoto's cold fire is something that can exist and does exist in our real world. Not in the exact way that he described it or how it's being used, but in a very similar way. Which shows that Horikoshi most likely took a lot of inspiration for what Shoto was able to do in this chapter from the real world idea of a cold flame or a cold fire. And we get to see that idea in action by having it be done on Dabi and able to freeze him in this chapter, which is something that cold fire can do. So it's cool to see that in this type of way, the quirk of half hot, half cold is scientifically rooted in our real world to a certain extent, and that the things that Shoto was able to do is actually very feasible. So most likely what Shoto could have been doing with the concentration of his entire body at equilibrium in the center of his chest, he could, in theory, have been gathering the helium in the surrounding area to make the shape of the flame on his chest and then being able to release it as a cold flame, freezing the entire environment. So pretty much how Flash Fire Fist Phosphor works is that it is the concept of a cold flame rooted in our real world science, but used in a fictional way with a fictional explanation that still kind of has roots in a scientific manner. And that's just amazing, and I really love that about My Hero Academia. How you're able to have quirks still have some scientific merit to it, but still adding that fictional aspect of it to make it more spectacular and more creative in the series while still being somewhat realistic. So yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to do with this video. I just wanted to go over how Shoto's new move would work in the real world and how much it's rooted in real world science. So let me ask you, did you enjoy this video? Do you want to see more videos of me tackling the scientific aspects of My Hero Academia in a more real world sense? Leave your thoughts down in the comments down below, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more content like this. So do all that cool jazz, and hopefully I'll be able to catch you in my next video. Goodbye! Huh!